Hey, Cookies here. This is going to be a video about how to understand a Discipline Priest log. We kind of went over this with before the raid came out in the pre-patch, or I guess the expansion launch before any of the content was out in the game. I kind of went over some logs from the beta and explained what we want to do for Discipline Priest ramping and stuff. But now that I've actually had time to play it and review it, I have a lot more information of what we can do to essentially look at a Discipline Priest log and analyze it a little bit. So the first thing is you want to pick really any boss. It doesn't matter too much. The only things you really need to know is what boss abilities do damage to the raid, unavoidable raid-wide damage. So pick a boss where that's easy for you. I'm going to pick Nexus Princess Kaiveza because I think this is one of the best fights for Discipline Priests in general. And then what we're going to do here is we're going to go to damage taken. And then up here at the top where it says all sources, we're going to change that. Oh, I'm sorry, I actually messed that up. Instead of over here, taken by friendly on this right side, we're going to change that to taken from ability. And this basically shows all of the boss's abilities that dealt damage to the raid and how much damage and all that stuff. And then you essentially want to figure out which boss abilities are unavoidable raid-wide damage. Like if we look at Stalking Shadows here, we're like, okay, this does the most damage to the raid, so let's look at that. You click this little plus button right here, but this is just damage that's constantly happening pretty much throughout the entire fight. There's only small little windows where it's not doing damage anymore. So that's not super helpful. We want small spikes of damage that are unavoidable. So we'll look at Nether Rift. This is when you place the portals on the ground and all the portals are sucking you in. And you can see here the vast difference. Like if I pull back up Stalking Shadows, you see the vast difference of it's a bump of damage and then it goes back down, and then it's a bump of damage and then it goes back down, and then this is just a steady streamline of damage for, you know, a straight minute and a half pretty much. So this is the kind of stuff we're looking for. And then the next thing is going to be Starless Night. This is the intermission phases, and as you can tell, there's these gaps all of a sudden where like we have a steady I guess like a pattern of this damage happening, but then there's these weird like 1 minute gaps for some reason, and that is because of Starless Night. If we put in Starless Night, that fills in that gap, and it's a similar big ramp of damage that then goes away after a short amount of time. So these are, you usually will have about 2 abilities per boss. That's what you'll be looking at as like the primary damage abilities. If it's like later bosses, usually the last 2 will have a few more abilities, but generally for most bosses, you can be pretty safe with finding 2 of the primary like unavoidable damage sources that go to the entire raid. So this is what we're going to look at, and now this kind of gives us an overview of when our healers should be pressing cooldowns. In this case, we're going to be looking at Discipline Priest. I'm going to go ahead and minimize this right here, this like event window right here. You can just press this little minimize button just to give yourself a little more room if you want. And so now what we're going to do is we need to figure out when the Discipline Priest was using cooldowns and how they were using them. And Discipline Priest really only has one major cooldown, which is Evangelism. So what we're going to do is go to the Cast tab. This is going to show all of our players in the raid and what, you know, how many times they casted abilities and stuff like this. We're going to click on the Discipline Priest. In this case, this is me playing Disc. This was a heroic raid that we did this past week. And then once we click on myself, you can see all the spells I cast, how many times I cast them, all of that. We're going to find Evangelism, and then we're going to click this little plus button again to add it to the timeline up above. So we do that. Now we can see everywhere we pressed our Evangelism during the fight. And then the next thing that we probably want to do, you could also add like Rapture in here if you want, because that's another sort of cooldown, I guess. And sometimes, usually a lot of people will just line it up with Evangelism, but sometimes people will spread it out and use it in other places. But for now, let's just keep it simple and use Evangelism as an example. So now we can see when we used Evangelism, and all we want to make sure at a first glance is that Evangelism is being cast as this damage is going out, not during and not after. If it's during, that's still fine. It definitely still works, but ideally it's right, like if it's going to be pressed during a Nether Rift, you want it right here at the start of the Nether Rift. Same thing with like during the intermission, because it's longer, it could be somewhere in the middle. It could be kind of towards like this beginning of the ramp, because you want essentially Evangelism is going to extend all your active atonements, which allows you to heal for longer. So you usually want to activate it somewhere where the damage is starting to ramp up, and then the Evangelism is active for the entire duration of like that big burst of damage at the top here. Like how we have, you know, a ramp up and then a top off and then a ramp down. You want the evangelism active during the top off. So now what we do here is we can kind of line this up. And if you want an easier view on this, so you don't have to kind of like try to figure out where it was. For one, you can use the actual timer. If you hover over it, it says it was cast at 28 seconds. So then we just go here and look at 28 seconds and there it is. So it's like just after the big burst of damage happens. So this is a little bit late, I would say. And then we go to the next one and it's 235. So then we just go to 235. That's about the same. It's actually a little bit better because it's right at the peak. It's literally as it hits the peak damage. So that's a much better one. And then we have this last one, which is at 409. And if we go here to 409, this one is very bad because what is happening is we have this big ramp of damage that's happening to the raid, but then we press evangelism when the ramp is starting to die down. So by the time we actually get use out of evangelism, which is basically this back half right here behind it, it's the raid damage is already going away and the raid isn't taking much damage at all anymore. So that's like a very first quick glance. You can literally just look at that and go, are you pressing evangelism at good times? If we want to break this down just a little bit further, you can also break down the ramp itself, which also, this requires you to know a little bit more about Disc Priest, but I can go ahead and break it down really quick. So what we do is we would look at our ramp. So we basically want to take about somewhere around like 15 to 30 seconds before and after the ramp. So we'll go right here, take about 15 seconds, and then you just click and drag your mouse through it, and it just highlights this area. We do that. If it pops up blank like this, sometimes it likes to bug out a little bit, so all you do is hit reset zoom up here at the top, and then you just do it again. So we're just going to take 15 seconds, 15 seconds. There we go. Now you can even see a much closer look at when evangelism was cast during the damage window. But what we want to do here is instead of looking at casts now, we want to look at timelines up here. It's this little other tab that's at the top right. So we go to timelines. And what this is going to do is show us what abilities were cast and in what order. So we can see basically what we're going to be looking for because we're just looking for the ramp. We don't really care what happened outside of the ramp. So we're trying to find evangelism. So you can see evangelism in a row right here, and we're just going to scroll through this until we see evangelism. So there's evangelism right there. So that means this is our ramp right here, this whole thing. So all we do is we go back to the beginning, and generally what a ramp should look like, whether you play Discipline Priest or not, just so that you can break it down really easily, is you want to be applying atonements through either Flash Heal, Renew, or Power Word Shield. It doesn't matter too much, just as long as you're applying initial atonements. Then you're pressing 2 Radiance casts, which is this spell right here. And then you are pressing pretty much all of your major damage abilities along with Evangelism, which is usually going to be things like Void Wrath or Void Wraith or Shadow Fiend or Mindbender. It's going to be called different things depending on talents. But for now, you'll mostly see Void Wraith. Then you do use Evangelism. Also, the order of these doesn't really matter. I've even seen some orders of and I've been kind of messing around with it, where you can cast Mind Blast first, and then you can Radiance, and then you press your Void Wraith, and then you then you Evangelism. The order of spells does not matter too much. So what is important is just remembering the sequence of sort of the idea of the spells that you're pressing. So we're applying initial atonements. We press a bunch of Flash Heals. We're applying initial atonements to the raid. We press Radiance twice to apply more atonements, and it's important that we use both of them because that's what allows us to spread our atonements to the entire raid. Then we are using our major cooldowns, which is going to be Void Wraith and Evangelism, and then we are doing as much damage as we possibly can within a short window, which is essentially going to be always pressing Mind Blast, Penance, Halo, and including a lot of smites, and then usually another Penance towards the end. But that's the general idea. So applying initial atonements, which we have. Then we use 2 Radiances. We have that. Then we have our major cooldowns, which is going to be Void Wraith and Evangelism. We have that. That's good. Then we have Mind Blast. Then we just have various damage spells. Penance, Halo, Smites, another Penance. Doesn't matter too much. That's the idea. So that is how you break down a ramp and see if they're doing it correctly. So then we can go to another ramp, for instance. So we reset the zoom and we go to the next one. So we look at the second Evangelism. We just do the same thing. We just highlight it. We can see this one was cast at a much better time. You can see it line up very well at the very beginning of the damage ramp, which is perfect. But now we need to see if, the casts that were being used were also good. So we go through here. We're just looking for Evangelism. We can see it right here. All right, so we go through here. We have initial atonements. Generally, you want more than just this. It looks like this is about 5 atonements that were applied because these are instant cast flash heals. It's not too bad, but I would say it depends on your raid size, but as a general recommendation, you probably want about 6 or more atonements being cast and initially applied before you start using Radiance. But we have the initial atonements here. Then we have a Radiance. We have a Void Wraith, Mind Blast, another Radiance. So again, it doesn't matter too much that the spells are in different orders. The idea is the same. Initial atonements we have, double Radiance we have, then we have our major cooldowns, Void Wraith and Evangelism being cast near each other. We have that. Mind Blast, then damage abilities. Penance, we're missing Halo, but that's okay. We have some smites, and then that's about it. And then we can just quickly check the last one. So we go here to the last one, we highlight that, and we can see this one was at a very bad timing. We had all this damage happening in the raid for almost 20 seconds, it looks like, before we pressed Evangelism. So Evangelism back here would be much, much more useful because what we get is 6 seconds of damage happening to the raid where Evangelism is useful. And at that point, it's probably not that useful. So we're going to find Evangelism here once again. There it is. And now we're going to look again. So we have initial atonements being applied. We have Flash Heal, Power Word Shield, Flash Heal, Flash Heal, Flash Heal. Then we have a Radiance. We have a Penance thrown in there for some reason. That's probably definitely a mistake. Then we have a Void Wraith Evangelism. That's our cooldowns. We have another, we have our 2 Radiances here. So even though they're spread out, that's still okay as long as we're using both of them in this window. And then we have Mind Blast, and then we're dealing damage with various spells. We have Smite, Penance, Shadow Word Death, and then more Smites. So still okay. This one's definitely a lot more messy. You can tell like the Radiances are really split up. The cooldowns are split up a little bit, and we don't have as many atonements being applied at the start. And then the worst thing was obviously the timing of the Evangelism cast itself. But otherwise, these are all pretty okay. As long as you're not missing things like initially applying atonements or pressing both Radiances and using both cooldowns, Void Wraith and Evangelism together, and then pressing Mind Blast, you're good. As long as you're doing those things, it's fine if you do them out of order or suboptimally. This is how you get, 90% of your healing output, and then getting that extra 10% output is just from pressing the spells in the correct order or kind of min-maxing the spells that you're pressing and how many, damage spells you get at the end of it and stuff like that. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful. I plan to do this with all of the healers in the current season, so hopefully I'm getting that done over the weekend. So keep an eye out for that, just so that we can kind of understand logs a little bit better as a healer, whether you're someone who just wants to help look at other healer logs, or you are playing the class itself and you just want to know how to kind of break it down and look through it after you are done with a raid. That's what this will be for. So this will be a little series, and yeah, I plan to keep releasing them over the course of the next week while I raid on the remainder of the healers. Have a good one, and see you later.